prevention and reentry. That's the foundation on which places like Winchester and Harrisonburg that are seeing this discouraging rise in opiate addiction are going to be made safe. The Safe Justice Act gives prosecutors the tools to do that, to implement those kinds of solutions, changes the rules for sentencing, but it does so much more to provide the legs, support the legs of that stool. That's why I support that. That's why I'm really pleased to be here today to talk about it. And I look forward to the discussion after. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, give him another round of applause. I thought that was riveting. I watched The Wire, but that was a lot more informative. I want to now bring up somebody who has a rare double authority. Bernie Kerik is someone who is a hero to many, who has not only been someone who has worked in law enforcement, he has been a jailer. He's had to deal with these problems face-to-face, tough problems with some of the toughest people in New York, one of the toughest towns in the world, and did an extraordinary job there. He also spent time as one of the jailers and has a particular unique kind of authority on this issue. When I was in college, he talked about thesis, antithesis, synthesis. His life has really been that. And the synthesis that he has arrived at has allowed him to lead an incredible organization called the American Coalition for Criminal Justice Reform. But also just his name attracts so much attention and so much, and brings so much power to this issue. We're just lucky to have him here, Bernie Kerik.
Sensenbrenner, and have the opportunity to talk to you about something I think, personally I think, as Van mentioned earlier, is one of the top domestic issues in this country, criminal justice reform. And I have to tell you, as Tim was up here talking just a second ago, I don't know him. I've never met him. This is the first time I've ever met him. But I've heard great things about him. And I have to tell you, coming at this issue from both sides of the perspective, if you will, I'm really happy to hear some of the things he said and the way he operated his office. I will tell you that's not the case, in every office. But I give him a lot of credit for doing what he's done, what he said when he was up here, and hopefully other people, United States attorneys around the country will listen. As Van talked about, I come at this issue from two very distinctly different perspectives. During my 27 years in state and federal law enforcement, I served as a military policeman in the Army, a street cop, an undercover cop, a correctional officer, a federal drug agent, a county jail warden in New Jersey, and commissioner of the New York City Department of Correction, including overseeing Rikers Island, which was once one of the most violent jail systems in this nation, in which we averaged about 133,000 annual admissions. I served as commissioner of the NYPD. It is the largest police department in the nation. I had 55,000 uniformed civilian personnel under my command with a $3.2 billion budget. I oversaw the police response to the September 11th attacks, and on the eve of September 11th, I just want to stop for a second and say that my thoughts and prayers are with the families of those that were lost on that day, to the 23 men and women that I lost that worked for me, the 343 firefighters, 37 Because of my substantial law enforcement experience, background, and expertise, President George W. Bush nominated me to take over the Department of Homeland Security in 2004. I was forced to withdraw my name from consideration after admitting that I failed to pay payroll tax on my children's name. Ultimately, this led to state and federal charges being brought against me and crushed financially, indicted on stacked charges, threatened with the rest of my life in prison, and not being there for my young daughters throughout their formative years in adulthood. I saw firsthand the realities that prompted federal judge, New York federal judge, Jed Rakoff, to write the article, Why Innocent People Plead Guilty. In 2010, I had this historic and tragic distinction of being one of the only people, one of the only persons in this country with my background, experience, and success in law enforcement to become an inmate in a federal prison. Immediately, and throughout my 4-year sentence, I saw that everything I believed about the federal criminal justice system was wrong, just about everything. I always thought that federal prison was reserved for the worst of the worst. I was wrong. The vast majority of the men that I was housed with during my time in prison were some of the lowest hanging fruit. I met many young, first-time, non-violent drug offenders that were sentenced to 10 and 15 years of prison. And basically, with what Tim was talking about on these conspiracy enhancements and things like that, these were young men, young kids. I met commercial fishermen who caught too many fish. I was housed with a young man who sold a whale's tooth on eBay, and some things like that. I was basically housed with hundreds of non-violent, many first-time, low-level drug offenders. Many were initially charged at the state level, and this goes back to something Tim was talking about. Instead of receiving probation at the state level or some punishment at the state level, they were turned over to federal prosecutors and then sentenced. And I judged this based on my time as a New York cop, as a New York narcotics cop. You know, at one point in my career, I was an undercover for the New York City Police Department. All I did was buy drugs. I had hair, period. But it was down, it was actually down in the middle of my back. I had 7 diamond earrings, I had a big goatee. And my buy areas was Harlem, Spanish Harlem, and Washington Heights. I bought a lot of drugs, and I knew a lot of drug dealers. And then I went to prison, and I met these guys that were sentenced to 10 and 15 years for something that I knew in state court would have been probation. It would have been a 6-month sentence. It would have been reduced to a misdemeanor. And I'm sitting there looking at these young men, these young kids, that's going to do 10 to 15 years in a federal prison. Turning them, basically, we turn them into thugs. Many of these guys were in prison because federal prosecutors added together small drug purchases over a period of time to get drug quantities they needed to trigger the mandatory minimums. All of this was done, I think, so that the threat of some of these long-term sentences, and I mean long-term sentences, some of these kids were threatened with 25 to life. I actually met a guy, a young man, that was doing 30 years. He had 1 kilo of cocaine in a car, stopped on a car stop, no priors, no violence, no nothing. 30 years he got. Look, a kilo of cocaine is a lot of cocaine. You could do a lot of bad stuff on the streets. 30 years for a first-time non-violent offense. I don't know. I don't get it. And I want to clarify this. I put a lot of people in prison. Bad people that did bad things. People that tried to kill me. People that killed men I worked with. People I seized tons of cocaine from. Tons and millions in drug proceeds. But then I went to prison and I met these guys sentenced to 30 years for a first-time non-violent offense. America needs to get out of the business of overcriminalization. Low-level, nonviolent, and especially first-time offenders, many of whom are veterans, drug addicted, and/or suffering from mental illness, need treatment and disciplined rehabilitation, not incarceration and punishment. The federal government should end prosecutorial overreach and focus instead on disrupting high-level players on an international and interstate basis. The federal government should adopt, as some states have done, specialized diversion programs for low-level players who are swept in. Ending overcriminalization will result in fewer people going to prison, where they become institutionalized and forever tarnished with the conviction and the collateral consequences that come with being labeled a convicted felon for the rest of their life. And I don't think anyone gets that. I don't think the American public gets it. I don't think the general public gets it. I don't care what you're charged with. That young man that sold a whale's tooth on eBay and is now a convicted felon is going to be tarnished with that label for eternity until the day he dies. If it happened when he was 20 and he lives to be 120 for 100 years, he suffers the collateral cost of that conviction. It's insane. The punishment is supposed to fit the crime, but I can tell you, in the federal criminal justice system, in any criminal justice system today where you're charged with a felony, in many, many cases, the punishment does not fit the crime. Meaningful treatment and incentivized reward upon graduation and completion of a successful term of probation encourages offenders to get the help they need to avoid reoffending, much like the Safe Justice Act will do. A similar program should certainly be designed for our veterans, to whom we owe so much, yet have neglected them so badly. And I have to tell you, there were a lot of, where I was, I met a lot of young military veterans. They had drug problems as a result of, going overseas, 2 tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, things like that. We've got to do something for these kids to get them back on their feet. Until today, sentencing guidelines and mandatory minimums are repealed or replaced, and I think they must be soon. Federal imprisonment should be reserved for the worst of the worst federal drug offenders. Those who run criminal drug cartels and deal in substantial quantities, like the Safe Justice Act does. I believe most Americans would be shocked, as I was, to learn that no criminal intent is required for conviction under many of our federal statutes. Today, conduct that could and should be handled with civil fines and penalties can land you instead in federal prison. Overcriminalization must be erased from our laws, and the Safe Justice Act is a step in that direction, a big step. Federal agencies should stop the usurping of the authority of Congress by making regulations and giving them the force of criminal laws and penalties. Agencies must be stopped from criminalizing specific conduct to ensure that we do not over-incarcerate or incarcerate anyone for something they didn't even know was a crime. Many things are wrong and should be handled. Many things that are wrong should be handled, could be handled with civil penalties and fines, not by imprisonment. Prison time of any significant length should be reserved for people who are truly a danger to society and others. The 10th Amendment provides that the federal government is one of limited powers. We should ensure that federal drug mandatory minimums apply only to the kingpins, leaders, and organizers, managers, and supervisors for whom Congress intended. We must reform federal prosecutorial practices to ensure that conspiracy principles are not used to continue sweeping in nonviolent, low-level offenders. We need to ensure that the punishment fits the crime, whether that is a diversion, a civil fine, or a sentence without a mandatory minimum. And lastly, I'm encouraged to hear that Congressman Goodlatte is working on a bill that addresses the need for default mens rea. I urge him to schedule that bill for markup soon, along with this act. which has already been endorsed by Speaker Boehner. These bills represent important reforms of our criminal justice system that Congress can make. Far too much talent, time, and tax dollars are being wasted to warehouse human beings who are literally dying with their eyes open. For years now, we've been talking about these issues that everybody on Capitol Hill knows exist. It's time to stop talking and start acting. It's time to stop talking and do it, for God's sakes, do it. Sadly, and even more tragically, but for the grace of God, without these reforms and the things that we're talking about here today, it could be any one of you. Thank you.
You rarely hear me use the word hero for anybody that's living, but I think you can see why he's earned that title. And that same strength of character, and that same courage that served his country so well before he had that, his own experience, is now available to really get us to a country with liberty, justice for all. Let's give another round of applause. I'm always... Our last speaker is someone whose personal life in the most intimate way has been touched, not by nonviolent crime, but by violent crime. She's a friend of mine. She's somebody who has moved and changed a lot of hearts in California. She works with Californians for Safety and Justice. She's somebody who could very easily take the opposite position from everything you've just heard and would have a right to, and nobody could tell her that she was wrong, given what she's experienced. I want you to hear from her and the perspective that she has on all these issues now. Her name is Dionne Wilson.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to be here today, and I want to thank Representative Scott and Sensenbrenner. I wish she was still here so I can thank him personally, but for their leadership on this issue and bringing this before a body of people who actually has the power to change the face of criminal justice as we know it in this country. I think it's really a great show of leadership. So, as someone who's been deeply affected personally by our current policies, I'm really grateful to be here and to share my story with you and to let you know why it's important that that we really recognize and begin to recognize who victims really are. Like you, I really thought that I knew everything about who was in prison and who belonged in prison. And because I was married to a police officer, and I had a certain view because we're really steeped in this us versus them mentality. And then in 2005, my husband had been in the dream job of his life for only 3 years. I got that knock on my door. And it's just been the 10-year anniversary. It still hurts. And my friends in uniform told me that my husband had been shot and killed in the line of duty. And my perspective on criminal justice and who was in prison didn't change at that point. It was kind of cemented even further that I really thought, well, now I'm just really angry and now I want blood. I'm out for vengeance. And I got what I wanted. I got what was promised to me. Irving Ramirez got the death penalty, and he's in San Quentin on death row right now. And I was promised that that would heal me. That would be the thing that would make everything okay, or as okay as it could be. And that didn't happen. And so I had to go through my own process of what does it look like to heal, to move forward from something like that. And I was fortunate enough to be connected with Californians for Safety and Justice in 2012 when they were first starting. And the organization, the key goals are to elevate the voices of crime survivors, to truly put the voice of victims at the center of public policy making. I'm very proud to say that I am a founding member of Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice. In California, we're now over 6,000 members strong. And when I started going out and talking to crime survivors about what they want, I learned a lot. I learned that most crime survivors don't look like me. They don't have my privilege as a victim and as an individual. And, when you are a cop's widow, you're handed everything. You're given all the resources you could possibly want. People listen to you. People want to hear what you say about your views on criminal justice reform. But the people who are most impacted by violent crime, as was said here today, poor communities, color primarily, no one listens. No one hears them. And so this, what you're doing, Dan, what you're doing, everybody here, this act, this is crucial to actually honoring and starting to heal what victims experience, to break the cycle of crime. I had the really amazing opportunity. I was invited to go into San Quentin prison and talk to a large group of prisoners about criminal justice reform, about my story. And after my talk, a man approached me, and he looked old, but I don't think he was old. He had no teeth, and he walked with a hunch, and he had tears streaming down his face, and he thanked me for coming in and talking to him, and he said, my wife was murdered too, because my husband was murdered. I shared my story. He said, my wife was murdered. And naturally, I thought, he did it. He murdered his wife. But he didn't. It was someone else. But he was in prison because he didn't get the services he needed. And he self-medicated his trauma with meth, with alcohol. He was the sole caretaker of his 2 young children at the time. And he was completely devastated by the loss of his wife. And he couldn't handle it. And so he went to prison on these mandatory minimums, and his children went into foster care, and I have no idea what the outcome with that is, but people who know foster care know that most of the time it's not good. So they not only lost their mother to a violent murder, but they lost their father to prison. Because our system failed him as a crime victim. And that is why reinvestment of corrections dollars back into what actually drives crime is so vitally important. I've heard this story over and over again. Not that everybody I talk to ends up in prison, but that services are not available because we're focusing our investments in the wrong place. That's what needs to stop. And I love that the Safe Justice Act actually reinvests correction spending back into programs that will end these cycles of violence that we can't seem to incarcerate our way out of. We've been desperately trying for 30 years. It's not working. And actually people are starting to notice. And that's incredible. I'm very humbled by the privilege that I have to go around and talk to people and hopefully use my story to influence people to act in ways that show real leadership in this area. And I know it's difficult. I know people are afraid that they're going to lose their job, not get reelected, whatever. But I would say to people who are afraid to be bold that you're here for a reason, that you have the desire to serve the public. So serve by leading. Go first. It's okay. Look at what Representative Scott and Sensenbrenner are doing. And Senator Leahy, I heard him say at the Fair Justice Summit that Dan put on, that ending mandatory minimums is a moral issue. And that, you know that little emoji on your phone with the hearts for eyes? That was me when I heard that. I couldn't believe, I loved that. Yes, it's a moral issue. We need to embrace who victims are, no matter what they look like, no matter where they come from, no matter how little money they have, how little education they have. If you look, they're usually the ones filling up our prisons. So let's heal that. And I think that passing this legislation will be a huge first step in repairing the harm that has been done to crime victims across this country. Thank you very much.
I never know what to say after she talks. Please give her another round of applause. I never thought about the fact how many people who are incarcerated are also victims. I think that echoes a lot of what we've heard. Well, listen, we have about another half hour or so together. Is Molly here? Where's Molly? Hi. So I'm going to bring up, now listen, Cut 50's not even a year old. A lot of these groups that are jumping up and down nowadays and screaming and yelling, not even a year old. FAM has been on the front lines of this thing. Families Against Mandatory Minimums has been on the front lines of this fight when nobody, you couldn't get Democrats to touch it. And so we are very, very fortunate to have a representative of that very important organization. And I also want to direct you to their materials. There's some false information going on about mandatory minimums, and as usual, we all rely on FAM to bat those down. So but don't leave without those materials. Some poor intern schlepped them over here. So please, please make sure to take your own copy of it and give Molly a warm welcome. She's going to take it.
Thank you for coming today. It's great to see a packed room, and I am